Hello everyone. In this video, we pick up the conversation again around anger. In the last video, we talked about the metaphysics of anger, everything related to the structure of anger, the phenomenology, the what it's like of anger. We talked about the 5 different parts of an emotion and how to maybe think about anger, explore all the different sides of anger. We differentiated anger from other kinds of emotions and responses, such as frustration, venting, resentment, and passive-aggressiveness. We noted how anger is often a secondary emotion and often covers over or conceals more vulnerable feelings like hurt, disappointment, abandonment, and so on, although you might see it as 2 sides of the same coin. So as much as you want to be able to access those more vulnerable feelings, you also want to have the capacity to embody those more assertive energies as well. We, most importantly, I would say, differentiated anger from aggression. So aggression is the violent, impulsive, dysregulated acting out in actuality. So it's the yelling, screaming, stomping around, throwing things, slamming cupboard doors, punching, hitting, kicking. That's aggression, and it's almost never warranted. It's almost never helpful, and so that's not at all what we're after in these conversations. We're trying to access the feeling, and doing so with the ability to effectively regulate that emotion. So being able to tolerate the feeling without being overwhelmed by it, without it being impulsive and dysregulated. So those are some of the things that we talked about in our last conversation. We noted that there's an important part of being able to visualize what that energy wants to do, and the feeling itself it's not you, it's a part of you. So the whole of you involves a great many things, of which anger is only a small part. So, and then we talked about the difference between anger and shame, the relationship between anger and shame, and how that may be of interest to some people. So a lot covered in that last video. It is very much like a foundational kind of piece to the conversation that we pick up here. So if you haven't watched that video, please watch that video. Otherwise, there may be a risk of misunderstanding a little bit of what we're trying to do in this one. So these next 2 videos are on dealing with problems of anger. The follow-up to this one, we'll talk about people who have issues with managing their anger, or people who are dysregulated or impulsive, or arguably have too much anger. And in this video today, we're going to discuss first, what it looks like to have arguably not enough anger, or low capacity to hang out in that feeling and make use of it in assertive ways. So let's maybe explore what that kind of looks like. So symptoms of a problem in this way may look like someone who is excessively passive, someone who is prone to people-pleasing. They maybe have poor boundaries and have a difficulty asserting boundaries. There's generally a lack of assertiveness in this person's personality. There's maybe a lack of confidence, a lack of self-worth. They tend to be very fearful of conflict or disagreement, or otherwise they can sometimes be indirect or subdued in their expression of anger. So it can come out in some roundabout ways through like passive aggressiveness, resentment, and things like that, although that's not always the case. So if that sounds like you or someone that you know and care about, then this video may be insightful. Now, what we talk about here won't cover every possible angle of why someone might have those kinds of difficulties or personality traits, but this can often be part of the problem, so hopefully this is helpful. So first we want to conceptualize the problem. How do we make sense of this problem? Well, one way of doing so is to view it as a person having a difficulty in just sitting with the feeling, being able to regulate that emotion without being overwhelmed by it. So it's almost like people that struggle in this area, it's almost like their body anticipates that anger is just going to be too much, it's going to be too big, perhaps it's going to be impulsive and dysregulated, or they just don't have a comfortable relationship with their anger. And so you can almost think of it as having like a phobic reaction to their anger. So when the anger starts to show up in their body, they just get tense and uncomfortable, and they don't know what to do, or they shut down, or they freeze up, and that's often what's going on there. So some of the reasons for this, they can be incredibly varied, but I mean, it could be, growing up, they had parents who didn't, effectively model what healthy anger could look like, and just being assertive and being confident, and, being at odds with another person and expressing that in pro-social ways. Like maybe what they saw was, the yelling, screaming, and just the stomping around and irritability, and maybe as a child that was like scary and terrifying and uncomfortable, and you felt like you're walking on eggshells all the time, and maybe that's what you associated with anger. That's what you took anger to be, because that's all you've ever known. And so maybe you've decided on some, I don't want to be like that. So you imagine that that's what anger is, when in fact that's not anger, that's aggression, and that's dysregulated anger. The person arguably has a problem in being able to effectively regulate their anger or access the more vulnerable feelings, and coming from that place. Another reason is that perhaps as a child, when they were angry or expressed any kind of assertive energy, maybe they were punished for it, maybe they were shamed for it, maybe their parents never validated that or acknowledged that or knew what to do with that. Maybe the parents themselves could have been like overwhelmed in the face of the child's anger, and perhaps that caused some kind of phobic reaction or some difficulty there. There could be all kinds of reasons. I don't want to lay out all of them, but just to give you a feel for what that can look like. So you can think of like the person who is excessively compliant or excessively passive, or lets the other person take the lead in the relationship or whatever it is, as the poor boundaries, the inability to set boundaries. You can think about this as an adaptation in many cases. It might have been useful or effective to prevent conflict or some problem or something that might have been even more overwhelming at some earlier stage in that person's life. That is often the case. So have a bit of self-compassion toward yourself. If you struggle in these areas, there's probably some reason for it to be a difficulty there. We also want to talk about maybe the anger, a healthy relationship with your anger as being a necessary part of self-confidence and self-worth. So on the one hand, to have that emotional self-confidence, you intuit on some level that your feelings of disappointment and hurt and feeling dismissed and abandoned, whatever that might be, you acknowledge that those feelings matter, that they're worth attending to, that they're not something that you should dismiss or just turn away from. You can acknowledge and feel your way through whatever that is. But also, if someone had dismissed you, or someone had abandoned you, or someone had brushed you off or let you down or whatever it is, that there can be some feeling toward that person who caused the hurt, who caused the disappointment, and that's where that anger is able to come in, that assertive energy, that expansive energy, the warm sensation in your sternum, in your chest, your shoulders, the feeling enlarged in your body, the feeling like you can handle yourself, and the feeling like you want to address this with the person who's caused the disrespect or hurt or disappointment, whatever it is. So that's an important part of self-confidence. Knowing and feeling that anger can show up if it needs to in a situation where there's an impasse with another person or a difficulty of some kind. Now, when people notice that they struggle with certain things like setting boundaries, they often wonder, well, why can't I do this? I know that I should assert these boundaries, tell this person to stop doing what they're doing, or ask them to treat me with dignity and respect, and yet I can't bring myself to do it. Why is that? Well, knowing is not enough. You have to be in a feeling that's conducive to acting it out. And so that feeling is that assertive energy, something that we might say at the far end, that's anger. So if you can't access that energy, it's going to be very hard for you to assert yourself and set boundaries with people when there's a need to. So just understand that, right? So the goal then should be to try to get a more better acquainted with those feelings. Another thing that can be helpful is redefining conflict. So many people have a phobic reaction to conflict. They don't like the idea of conflict. And I think that's often because when people envision it, they imagine that it's going to be yelling and screaming and fighting and all of that aggressive energy and so on. And it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to at all. We can talk about like what you do if that is more of an issue or a concern, but really try to redefine conflict. Try to redefine it in a way where you're just addressing something in a forthright way with another person. You're facing something together with another person, and you're doing it directly or in a resolute way. That's kind of what that is, and you want to be able to do that in order to just be in a healthy relationship with someone. You have to have the capacity to do that. So try to redefine in your mind what conflict is, and on the far end of things, if it's aggressive and all this other kind of thing, well, yes, of course, you want to avoid that, but you might be able to, disengage from that kind of encounter if it leads to that. So remember that like people who have uncomfortableness with anger or a phobic reaction to anger, remember that it has a purpose, it has some utility, it has its uses. So it safeguards against excessive anxiety, against passivity, excessive passivity, feelings of shame. It protects you against feelings of shame. Anger turned inward often manifests as shame. It's part of healthy self-worth. Intuits that you are worth defending, worth protecting. And it's part of just having that inner confidence on a feeling level, having that healthy relationship with anger. So hopefully we've made a strong enough case for why that feeling is so essential, so important, and some of the ways that you want to conceptualize this. Now, on to the good stuff. How do you address this? How might you try to work through this? Well, I would suggest that you start with trying to access the other side of the coin, the other emotional side of things. So the more vulnerable side of things. And many people who struggle with anger, they can do this, right? They can get to that side. So ask yourself, well, how am I feeling? And really trying to clarify that as much as you can. So a lot of people who struggle with identifying their emotions, they'll say something like, well, it's not good. I don't have a good feeling here. But that's an indirect way of trying to get at your feeling. So it's not a good feeling. So, well, what is good? Good is elated, expansive, warm and fuzzy energy, contentment in the body, calmness, whatever it is. It's not that. Well, what is it then? Well, it may be something like, well, it's sadness, or it's disappointment, or it's hurt, or it's loneliness, or it's feeling abandoned, or feeling disrespected, or whatever it is. So that more vulnerable side of things, try to see if you can capture that as a starting point, And so you might be able to say, well, yes, here I am feeling let down, feeling disappointed, feeling hurt. Good. Well, that's a good starting point, right? So if you start there and then ask yourself, well, who left you feeling that way? Who did the disappointing? Who let you down? Who hurt you? And maybe in some way you can ask yourself, somewhat playfully, I hope, did you cause your own hurt? Is this your doing? Is this your fault entirely? Now, people have like a very strong shame complex or reaction. That's where they go with it, right? But you want to try to be realistic about this. Don't go to that place where you're just so quick to, why I'm so foolish, I should have known better, I should have known not to trust this person or whatever. Try not to go down those places, those avenues. And maybe we'll say something about that in a little bit. But who is the cause of your distress? Is there someone who is the cause of your distress, of your pain, of your misery? And try to invite the feeling. So coax that feeling forward, invite that feeling forward a little bit. What is the feeling toward the person who hurt you? Right? So you're left feeling hurt. Yeah, well, who hurt you? Who left you feeling that way? You're left feeling frustrated. Who frustrated you? You know? You're left feeling disappointed. Well, who disappointed you? What is your feeling toward that person? And this is where people often struggle. So we'll talk about, what that tends to look like. So sometimes they'll kind of persist in saying, well, I'm frustrated. And, we might say that this is an inability to differentiate the symptom from the cause. So you're frustrated, that's the symptom. Well, who frustrated you? Well, this other person, the person who maybe promised one thing and then didn't follow through. Or this person who was talking behind your back and left you feeling, disrespected and hurt. So differentiating the symptom from the cause, What about, the thoughts that you might have? Well, the person might say, well, I don't like this. I don't like that they did this. I think that they shouldn't have done that, Well, this is maybe the thought. This is the concepts, the interpretation. What is the feeling? What is the feeling toward them? So persist in really inviting that feeling toward them to kind of come forward a little bit in your experience. And you can kind of frame it up a little bit playfully. Well, so you're left feeling hurt, you're left feeling disappointed, you're left feeling abandoned, whatever it is. Surely the feeling toward that person is not gratitude, right? So surely the feeling isn't, well, thank you so much, I'm just so full of just, happiness and gratitude that you've disappointed me and hurt me in this way. It can't be that. It can't be that. That doesn't make any sense, And so the feeling, it must be anger. It's got to be anger, no? Now, notice that there may be other detours into other emotions, right? So sometimes what will happen is that a person will say, well, I don't know, I know that they left me feeling hurt and disappointed and all the rest, but gosh, I just feel so bad for them because I know that they had a difficult life. I know that their parents just didn't treat them very well or didn't teach them what they should have taught them and so on. Now notice what's going on there, right? So the person is indulging in this empathy or compassion toward the person who hurt them. And, this is fine in a sense. You can have empathy and compassion for someone who, just makes a mess of their relationships and hurts the people closest to them and so on. You can do that. But the issue is one of timing, right? So in this moment, as you're trying to connect with that feeling of anger, if that feeling of pity for the other person, I'm feeling so hurt. Oh, I feel so bad for you that you've hurt me. It doesn't make any sense. The timing is a clue that tells you that this response, feeling pity for this person or compassion toward this other person in the face of being hurt by them, it's a diversion. It's an off-ramp. It prevents you from accessing that feeling of anger, right? So if you want to wait 5 minutes, you want to wait 10 minutes and then, have this compassion and empathy and pity for this other person and what they've been through, that's fine. You can do that. But in that moment when you're trying to acknowledge, a feeling of anger that you might have, it's a defense mechanism in essence, right? So you want to be mindful of those kinds of things. So another issue is that, well, a person gets kind of a little bit skittish about accessing that feeling of anger because, they don't want it to be aggressive. They don't want it to be violent. They don't want to then, have to call this person up and tell them off or something like that. But remember, this is the confusion between anger as a feeling and aggression in terms of how you might impulsively act it out. Okay, so we're not concerned about aggression. That's not what you're trying to access. That's not what you're trying to embody. That's not what you're after here. It's the feeling, just the feeling, that's it. So in my experience, this is a very common issue that people just get, so foggy on the matter of anger and aggression. They just feel so intertwined. And you just have to keep reminding yourself, okay, anger is not aggression. Anger is not aggression. Just keep repeating it to yourself, reminding yourself, bringing that into clear focus. So when you invite that feeling forward, you're trying to access that feeling. Remember what you're looking for, what you're trying to notice or allow to come forward into your experience. And that's the little spark, the little heat, the little surge of energy, right? You notice these things and don't be skittish about it. Don't be fearful of it. Notice it and allow that feeling to build a little bit. Just that little spark, that little heat. See if you can allow it to move a little bit. Can you allow that, give it permission to move into your body and expand throughout the core of your body. Remember, anger is not the tension. It's not the tightening up, That's the anxiety. That's what that is. If you think about this from an evolutionary perspective, anger is meant to give you all that fuel, that energy to do something, to act. Well, if the tension comes in, you can't act. You're constricted. You're in like a psychological straitjacket, You're very limited in terms of what you can do. Anger wants to expand. Anger is that power in your body, that dynamic force, the readiness to move, or the desire to move in some way. Allow that feeling to come through. And notice that the difference between the anger, the expansive kind of freeing up, the pressure from the inside out versus the pressure in that constricts, the tension. Notice the difference. And the tension is not your anger. That's very important to remind yourself over and over again. And it might be difficult. You just run into that wall of anxiety for a while and just trust that that's what's probably going to happen if this is something that you struggle with. Metaphors can be extremely useful to help you get better acquainted with these feelings. So many people, when they are trying to access a feeling and they have like a visual metaphor of what that might be, they imagine, it's like fireworks and explosions and bombs going off and all this kind of stuff. And those kinds of metaphors, what they're going to do is they're going to be more in line with the aggressive impulse. It's dysregulated, it's chaotic, it's uncontrolled, and all the rest of it. Whereas, try on a metaphor like envisioning like in your sternum, in your chest, in your shoulders. It's like you have just a cauldron of burning hot coals. And the hot coals, there's no, fireworks and flames and this kind of thing. They're just surging. And all that power and all that energy, it's just surging in your body. And you want to just allow that imagery to help you stay in that force, in that power, without it being chaotic, without it being impulsive. Some clients of mine who are maybe into the Marvel comics or movies, there's this Iron Man character that has like this core reactor in his chest. And it's like all this power just surging, just ready to do whatever he needs it to do. But it's that power in the core that is there. And it can be explosive if you let it, if you want it to be, perhaps. But it doesn't have to be. And so some kind of metaphor that will help you connect with that and help you just hang out in that energy is what you're wanting to do. In the last video, we talked about the metaphor of it being like a cylinder or barrel that just gets filled up with emotion and it can expand, and it never has to spill over because it can just expand to whatever degree you need it to. So that may be helpful. So once you access that feeling, if you can, and if you can't, that's fine. You'll probably just run into that tension, that anxiety, and I'll say a little bit more about that before we wrap up. But just trust that you'll you'll get there. You just have to keep hanging out in the tension. Don't run away from the tension. Don't resist temptation to avoid and distract and so on. But if you are able to access that energy, just a little bit of that spark, a little bit of that heat, a little bit of that expansiveness, then ask yourself, like, well, what does this feeling want to do? If this feeling had full control of my body, what would it want? What direction would it want to move in? How would it want to act if it had control of my body? Not that it does, but just imagine that it does for a moment, just as a visual or a mental enactment, a daydreaming almost of what that is. Explore how the feeling wants to be expressed and indulge in that brief little fantasy, and that will give you the time and the space to breathe through that energy, breathe through that feeling. So if you have a little fantasy about, it may want to be violent, right? And remember that is the feeling, that's not you. It's not that you want to be violent necessarily. It's that the feeling may want to. So if you're in a board meeting or something like that, and someone says something that is completely disrespectful, and you're left feeling angry, you might have that little flash of, I would just love to throttle this person, or I'd love to just like give this person a good verbal blasting for what they just said or what they just did. And you fantasize about that for maybe 10, 15 seconds, and that gives you your body permission to kind of breathe through that energy, and it's almost like it kind of washes through you. It's almost like it moves through you, and then it's done. It doesn't hang out there as this tension, this brooding, festering resentment. It doesn't have to do that. And then you can ask yourself, well, do I want to do something like that? And usually most people say, no, that would be totally at odds with my values, morals, who I want to be and how I want to act and that kind of thing. I'm not going to reduce myself to that kind of behavior. So that's part of how you want to maybe do that. So this is the necessary practice. So the visual, daydreaming, the mental enactments, it gives you the practice, where your body can exercise that energy or that feeling without being overwhelmed by it, hopefully. So from that feeling, when you have a comfortable relationship with that energy, or the calmness that comes with knowing that feeling can show up when it needs to, well, then you can more readily assert yourself. You can more readily, say what is on your mind when you know that someone else might be at odds with whatever that is. You can set boundaries. You can, simply walk away from conversations that are, unproductive or whatever it is. But you're not walking away in a state of anxiety. You're walking away in a state of anger. This isn't worth my time. I'm just going to remove myself from this situation because I can feel this energy building, and it's probably not going to lead to anything good. Maybe you decide to do that, but it's coming from an authentic experience of that anger as opposed to the anxiety, which conceals oftentimes the feeling of anger. Okay, so hopefully some of that makes sense. Now, what are some additional problems that people can run into? Sometimes people will say, well, I have a difficult time feeling angry toward this person because I love them, I respect them, I care about them so much. And, that shouldn't be an issue, really. In fact, you might say, well, it's because you care about them or respect them, or that you take them to be a friend or a loved one or whatever it is. It's because of that relationship that you feel angry at all. I mean, if it was just a nobody off the street, that was just a mere, happenstance interaction, you might just shrug it off and it might not mean anything to you, right? Whereas someone that has an understanding of an obligation to you, or commitment to you, or the presumption of care and whatnot is supposed to be there, and they acted in some terrible way, well, yeah, it would make sense that there'd be anger there. In a healthy relationship, in a romantic relationship, a marriage, a friendship, you want to trust that the relationship is strong enough to bear the weight of that anger. You can be angry with this person. It doesn't undermine your love for them, your care for them. It's just that you can't feel the anger and the compassion and the love and all the tender feelings at the same time. Those feelings are just going to have to subside for just a moment to make room for that assertive energy and that anger, and then address whatever that is, so that you can reestablish the hopefully the close connection and the mutual feelings of respect and care and so on. Now, some people struggle with imagining what the other person's reaction to their anger might be, so they worry that this other person is going to explode and lose their cool, or otherwise the person is intimidating. They're really much bigger than you and frightening in some way. And there's a number of things that you can do there. I mean, one, again, is that you don't have to act on the feeling. It's important to access the feeling, but you don't have to act on it if you don't want to. So that's one thing, just reminding yourself, like, yeah, you access the feeling, you can imagine what the feeling would want to do, but then you might say, yeah, you know what, I'm not gonna bother, it's not worth my time, or this person is so hot-tempered, that they're just not worth engaging with. They can't do that in a healthy way. If there is some difficulty, with maybe someone in the past that was really intimidating and scary and whatnot, imagine the feeling not manifesting in your body. This is something I picked up from Alan Abbas, who's one of the ISTDP guys, intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy. Imagine the feeling, you give that feeling to someone else's body. Like you imagine, Hafthor Bjornsson, who's this, if you watch Game of Thrones, he's the mountain character, just this massive, hulking, just, insane, powerful guy. And imagine that feeling, you take that feeling and allow this other person to embody that feeling. If that feeling was in his body, in Hafthor's body, what would it want to do? How would it want to manifest? How would it want to to come out toward the person who hurt you or abused you or whatever it is? And that can help, right? And your body doesn't know the difference. As you're fantasizing about that, you're able to experience a little bit of that energy almost vicariously as you envision it being embodied in someone else's physical body. So that may be helpful. And if you worry about it escalating to, well, if I assert myself, this other person's going to be aggressive, remind yourself that you don't want to be aggressive and you don't want to play that game. And if this person is trying to bait you into an aggressive exchange, it's more or less saying, well, might makes right. Whoever is the loudest wins, or whoever is the most physically imposing wins, or the one who can clobber the other person wins. And it's a caveman mentality, right? It's a reducing oneself to just the physical intimidation or something like that. And you don't want to play those games. You don't want to reduce yourself to that, caveman mentality. So if you see that sort of thing happening in another person is baiting you into that kind of exchange, just in your mind, just have a chuckle, have a laugh if you can. I'm not going to play that game. I don't have to play that game. I'm not going to reduce myself to that. So again, steering clear from the aggressive kind of thing. That's rare cases where it's warranted, where it's needed, or excusable. So hopefully that can help. Other people struggle in some ways because they're not allowing their body to be in a state that is conducive to that energy. So if they're laying kind of slouched on the couch or a chair, it's going to be hard to access that feeling. So sit upright. Get your shoulders back. Just invite that feeling to come through a little bit. Maybe stand up. Maybe just kind of pace around a little bit, not in a frantic kind of way, but in a way where there's some intent to it. You bring to your mind's eye the person with whom you're angry. Just try to be in a state that is more conducive to that feeling. Remember, anger sees with a squint. Focus on the person that you're angry with, and see if some of that will coax your body into some of that. if you run into the tension, the discomfort, the anxious kind of reaction, whether it's the constriction or maybe some people, they get severe parasympathetic anxiety response, they get the nausea and butterflies and so on. I mean, in that case, you really want to slow things down and take your time with it. But the anxiety, you want to, lean into it a little bit. Understand that on the other side of that anxiety is all of that feeling, all of that energy, the assertive energy that I'm describing, right? There's nothing scary there, right? People who haven't experienced this, or it's been a very long time since they have, would you rather feel anxious and uncomfortable and tense with the possibility of conflict or being at odds with someone or things escalating just a little bit? Would you rather feel that way and then engage in the avoidance and all these other coping mechanisms and so on? Or would you rather feel that expansive kind of heat and confidence in your body and being able to assert yourself, or walk away from that assertive place? Well, most people would be like, well, yeah, that sounds much better. I'd love to feel that way. Yeah. Well, in order to get to that place, you have to move through all of this tension or anxiety or discomfort that you might be experiencing. So trust that, if that is a problem for you, you will get there with persistence, but you really have to work at it. You don't want to reward that anxiety through the perpetual avoidance, through the being passive. And it's almost like you got to develop a part of your mind that is on the lookout for some of these coping mechanisms or modes of avoidance or defense mechanisms, whatever you want to call them. Like, notice, well, yeah, there I was being passive aggressive. I just sighed and rolled my eyes and walked away. Or I did this little thing that would annoy the other person, but I didn't express that I was feeling angry. Well, what was I doing? Oh, I was avoiding my anger. Yep. So you get good at noticing this kind of stuff. And then you challenge yourself. Okay, well, what would it be like to address this with that person, the person with whom I'm angry? Well, again, you try to envision it. You try to invite that feeling to come forward a little bit, and see where you go with it. Okay, that's going to be it for today. So in this video, we talked about people who have difficulty accessing anger, how that might manifest as a passivity or a difficulty asserting boundaries with people, or having greater confidence in possible conflict with other people, and how to conceptualize that, how to work through some of the tension and access some of the feelings, the different roadblocks that can come up that can get in the way of that. This isn't a solution necessarily for everyone in all situations, but hopefully there's something in there that you find insightful. Okay, if you liked the discussion here today, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, share this with people who might be able to benefit from it, and we'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.